Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be surrounded by the spirits of those who came before us? To walk through places where the boundary between our world and the next grows thin as morning mist? Well, you're about to find out, because today we're taking you on a journey through the 33 most haunted places around the world. Places where history's darkest moments echo through time, where the dead refuse to rest, and where visitors leave forever changed by what they've witnessed. From ancient castles dripping with centuries of bloodshed to abandoned hospitals where countless souls drew their final breath, these locations will make you question everything you thought you knew about the supernatural. We're talking about places so terrifying that even the bravest paranormal investigators have fled in absolute terror. Locations where the very air seems to pulse with malevolent energy, where shadows move on their own, and where the living become unwilling participants in the eternal suffering of the damned. Now, I know what you're thinking. You've heard ghost stories before, you've seen the movies, read the books, maybe even visited a few supposedly haunted places yourself. But what you're about to discover goes far beyond simple ghost stories. These are places where multiple witnesses have reported the same bone-chilling encounters, where the evidence is so overwhelming that even the most hardened skeptics have been forced to reconsider their beliefs about what exists beyond the veil of death. What makes these locations truly terrifying isn't just the supernatural activity that plagues them. It's the history. Every single place on this list has witnessed unspeakable acts of violence, injustice, and suffering. They've seen massacres, executions, torture, and tragedy on a scale that defies comprehension. And it's this dark history that seems to have created the perfect storm for paranormal activity, as if the very stones themselves remember the screams of the innocent, the last gasps of the dying, and the rage of those who were wronged. The stories you're about to hear aren't just tales passed down through generations. They're documented accounts from credible witnesses, security guards who've abandoned their posts rather than face another night of terror, tourists who've cut their vacations short after encountering something that defied all logical explanation, staff members who've quit their jobs rather than return to places where the dead walk among the living. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. These aren't just random hauntings. There's a pattern to the supernatural activity at these locations. The spirits that inhabit these places aren't just restless souls looking for peace. Many of them are angry, vengeful entities that seem to feed off the fear and suffering of the living. They're drawn to these locations by the intense emotional energy that was released during moments of extreme trauma, and they've been waiting, sometimes for centuries, for new victims to torment. We're going to start our journey in the heart of France, where one of the most elegant castles in the Loire Valley hides a secret so dark that even the current owners have learned to live with the presence of the dead. Then we'll travel to a small island off the coast of Venice, where the very soil is said to be composed of human ash and bone. We'll explore hospitals where the dying still wander the halls, prisons where the tortured souls of inmates refuse to leave their cells, and ancient fortresses where the executed still seek their revenge. Each location we visit will reveal new layers of terror, new evidence that death is not the end, but merely a transformation into something far more frightening. You'll hear about the Green Lady whose face is nothing but gaping holes where her eyes and nose should be. You'll learn about the island where human ash rises from the ground with every footstep, where the very air tastes of death and decay. You'll discover places where the temperature drops 40 degrees in seconds, where voices of the dead echo through empty corridors, and where the living are physically attacked by forces they cannot see or comprehend. But perhaps most disturbing of all, you'll learn about the patterns that connect these places, the common threads that run through every location, every encounter, every terrifying experience. Because once you understand these patterns, you'll realize that the supernatural world operates by rules we're only beginning to understand. Rules that suggest the dead are far more active in our world than we ever imagined, and that some places become permanent doorways between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Let's begin our descent into darkness with Château de Brissac in France, where the Green Lady has been terrifying guests for over 5 centuries. This isn't just some old castle with a few creaky floorboards and mysterious drafts. This is a place where the dead walk among the living, where the past refuses to stay buried, and where visitors come face to face with proof that some spirits never find peace. The chateau itself is breathtaking. 7 floors of magnificent architecture rising toward the sky, earning it the distinction of being the tallest castle in France. Ivy climbs its ancient walls, sunlight streams through its elegant windows, and tourists from around the world come to admire its beauty. But they have no idea what lurks within those walls. They don't know about the figure in green who glides through the corridors, whose very presence seems to drain the warmth from the air. Her story begins in the 15th century, during an era when adultery was punishable by death, when honor was everything, and when justice was swift and brutal. Charlotte de Brézé was the wife of a nobleman, living a life of luxury and privilege within the castle walls. But Charlotte had a secret. She was having an affair, carrying on a passionate relationship with another man while her husband was away on business. In those days, such behavior wasn't just socially unacceptable, it was a crime that could cost you your life. When her husband discovered the affair, his rage was absolute. Some say he found them together in the very room where Charlotte's spirit now appears. Others claim he discovered letters that revealed the extent of her betrayal. But however he learned the truth, his response was swift and merciless. Both Charlotte and her lover were murdered. Their lives ended in a moment of violent rage that would echo through the centuries. But death was not the end for Charlotte de Brézé. Instead, it was the beginning of a haunting so persistent, so undeniable, that the current owners of the chateau have simply learned to live with their supernatural resident. She appears most often in the tower room of the chapel, always wearing the same green dress that she wore in life. But it's her face that sends visitors fleeing in terror. Where her eyes should be, there are only gaping black holes. Where her nose should be, there's nothing but a void that seems to absorb light itself. The Duke of Brissac and his family. Have you ever wondered what makes certain places on this planet feel like doorways to something darker, something that shouldn't exist in our world? Tonight we're diving deep into the shadows to explore 33 of the most haunted locations across the globe, places where the living and the dead seem to coexist in the most unsettling ways imaginable. These aren't just your typical ghost stories or urban legends passed down through generations. We're talking about documented locations where countless witnesses have reported experiences that defy rational explanation. Places where history itself seems trapped in an endless loop of torment and despair. From ancient castles harboring centuries-old secrets to abandoned hospitals where suffering still echoes through empty corridors, these locations will challenge everything you think you know about what lies beyond the veil of death. What makes these places truly terrifying isn't just the supernatural activity reported within their walls, but the tragic histories that created the perfect storm for paranormal phenomena. We're talking about sites of mass death, unspeakable cruelty, and human suffering so intense that it appears to have left permanent scars on the very fabric of reality itself. Over the next hour, we'll journey across continents to uncover the dark secrets behind places like France's Château de Brissac, where the Green Lady has terrorized guests for over 5 centuries, her face bearing gaping holes where eyes should be. We'll explore Italy's cursed Poveglia Island, where over 100,000 plague victims met their gruesome end, their ashes literally forming the soil beneath your feet. And we'll venture into the depths of Kentucky's Waverly Hills Sanatorium, where the infamous body chute carried thousands of tuberculosis victims to their final resting place. But here's what makes this exploration different from anything you've seen before. We're not just recounting ghost stories. We've compiled extensive historical research, eyewitness accounts, and documented evidence to paint the complete picture of why these locations have become magnets for supernatural activity. You'll discover the psychological and historical factors that transform ordinary buildings into portals of terror. And you'll hear first-hand accounts from people who've encountered things that shouldn't exist. Let me start with a location that perfectly embodies everything terrifying about haunted places. Deep in the Loire Valley of France stands Château de Brissac, a magnificent castle that appears like something from a fairy tale. Its impressive architecture and ivy-covered facade hide one of the most disturbing supernatural residents you'll ever encounter. The castle's dark history begins in the 15th century with a double murder that would echo through the centuries. According to legend, an unfaithful wife named Charlotte de Brazy and her lover were brutally murdered by her enraged husband within the castle walls. What followed this act of violent betrayal was the creation of one of France's most infamous ghosts. The current residents, the Duke of Brissac and his family, have become reluctantly accustomed to sharing their home with an entity they call La Dame Verte, the Green Lady. She's most commonly spotted in the tower room of the chapel, always wearing her distinctive green dress. But here's where this ghost story takes a turn into pure nightmare fuel. Those who've encountered the Green Lady face to face describe a sight that haunts them for the rest of their lives. When she turns to look at you, her face reveals gaping holes where her eyes and nose should be, like looking at a walking corpse. The Duke's family has learned to live with her presence, but guests aren't so fortunate. Many have fled the castle in the middle of the night after encountering her eyeless stare in the darkness. What makes the Green Lady particularly unnerving is her persistence. She doesn't simply appear and vanish like many ghosts. She roams the castle's dimly lit hallways with purpose, her moans echoing through the ancient stone corridors in the early hours of the morning. Security cameras have captured her moving through rooms, and guests have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when she's near. The Green Lady represents everything that makes these haunted locations so terrifying. She's not just a residual haunting or an echo of the past. She's an active, intelligent entity that seems aware of the living and takes a particular interest in those who dare to sleep under the same roof. The fact that one of France's most prominent noble families has simply accepted her presence speaks to just how powerless the living can be when confronted with forces beyond their understanding. But France's haunted chateau is just the beginning of our journey into darkness. Off the coast of Venice lies an island so cursed that the Italian government has made it illegal for civilians to visit. Poveglia Island's history reads like something conceived in the deepest pits of hell, a place where human suffering reached such extremes that the very soil is composed of human ash. During the bubonic plague outbreaks that devastated Europe, Poveglia served as a quarantine station where over 100,000 plague victims were sent to die. But calling it a quarantine station doesn't capture the true horror of what happened there. This was essentially a human dumping ground where the sick were abandoned to suffer and die in agony. Their bodies burned in massive pyres that ran day and night. The island's nightmare didn't end with the plague. In 1922, a mental hospital was constructed on this foundation of death and suffering. The hospital's most notorious resident was a doctor who conducted horrific experiments on his patients, performing crude lobotomies with primitive tools. Witnesses reported that he would torture patients for his own twisted amusement, using the isolation of the island to conduct procedures that would have been unthinkable anywhere else. The doctor's reign of terror came to an end when he claimed that the spirits of plague victims were driving him insane. In a final act of madness, he threw himself from the hospital's bell tower. But even in death, his story took a supernatural turn. Witnesses claim he survived the fall initially, only to be strangled by a mysterious fog that rose from the ground. Today, Poveglia Island stands abandoned, but those brave enough to visit illegally report experiences that defy explanation. The island seems to pulse with malevolent energy. Visitors describe hearing the agonized screams of plague victims carried on the wind, the sound of medieval medical procedures being performed in empty buildings, and the distinct sensation of being watched by countless unseen eyes. What makes Poveglia particularly disturbing is the physical evidence of its dark past. Human bones and ash regularly wash up on the shore after storms. The soil itself is so contaminated with human remains that it's estimated 50% of the island consists of human ash. Walking on Poveglia literally means walking on the cremated remains of over 100,000 souls who died in unimaginable agony. The island's supernatural activity isn't limited to sounds and sensations. Photographers have captured strange mists and shadows that seem to move with intelligence. Electronic devices malfunction without explanation. And most disturbing of all, visitors report seeing apparitions of plague doctors with their distinctive bird-like masks moving through the ruins, as if still making their rounds among patients who died centuries ago. Moving from Italy's cursed island to the American South, we encounter Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky, a location that perfectly demonstrates how institutional suffering can create supernatural hotspots. This Tudor Gothic building, now considered one of the most haunted places in the world, was originally constructed to combat the tuberculosis epidemic that ravaged the early 20th century. What began as a small hospital grew into a massive complex designed to house hundreds of tuberculosis patients. The disease, known as the White Death, was essentially a death sentence during this era. Patients arrived at Waverly Hills knowing they would likely never leave alive. The exact number of deaths at the sanatorium remains disputed, with estimates ranging from 8,000 to 68,000 souls who perished within its walls. The most chilling feature of Waverly Hills is the Body Chute, also known as the Death Tunnel. This 525-foot tunnel was originally built to transport supplies, but it became the route through which thousands of corpses were secretly removed from the building. Hospital staff used this tunnel to hide the true extent of the death toll from patients and families. Understanding that the visible removal of so many bodies would destroy what little hope remained among the living. Today, the Body Chute is considered one of the most paranormally active areas of the entire complex. Visitors report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when entering the tunnel, as if the walls themselves remember the countless bodies that passed through. The temperature drops dramatically without explanation, and many people report hearing the sound of gurneys being wheeled through the darkness, carrying their invisible cargo toward the bottom of the hill. But the supernatural activity at Waverly Hills extends far beyond the death tunnel. Room 502 is particularly active, believed to be haunted by a nurse who took her own life after discovering she had contracted tuberculosis. Visitors report seeing her apparition in the hallway, still wearing her white uniform, forever walking the rounds she can never complete. The children's ward presents perhaps the most heartbreaking paranormal activity. Tuberculosis was particularly cruel to children, and many young patients died far from home and family. Their spirits seem to remain in the building, with visitors reporting the sound of children playing in empty rooms, small handprints appearing on dusty surfaces, and toys moving on their own as if manipulated by invisible hands. What makes Waverly Hills particularly compelling from a paranormal perspective is the sheer volume and consistency of reported activity. This isn't a case of occasional sightings or ambiguous experiences. The building seems to be in a constant state of supernatural activity, with multiple witnesses reporting similar phenomena across decades of investigation. Shadow figures are regularly seen moving through the hallways, often described as wearing period-appropriate clothing from the sanatorium's operational years. Electronic voice phenomena recordings have captured what appear to be voices of former patients calling out for help, asking for medicine, or simply crying out in pain. The building's elevators operate on their own, stopping at floors where the most deaths occurred, as if responding to calls from passengers who are no longer among the living. These first three locations already demonstrate the common elements that transform ordinary buildings into supernatural hotspots. Each site witnessed immense human suffering over extended periods. Each location was associated with death, disease, and despair, and each place seems to have retained some echo of that suffering, creating an environment where the boundary between the living and the dead becomes dangerously thin. But we're just getting started on our global tour of terror. From the execution grounds of the Tower of London to the cursed palace of Bhangar Fort in India, from the plague island of Poveglia to the solitary confinement cells of Eastern State Penitentiary, we'll explore how human cruelty and suffering can leave permanent scars on the physical world itself. The Tower of London represents over 900 years of imprisonment, torture, and execution. Since its construction by William the Conqueror in 1067, this fortress has witnessed some of the most brutal moments in English history. 3 queens met their end within its walls, including Anne Boleyn, whose ghost is said to be the most persistent spirit haunting the grounds. Anne Boleyn's execution in 1536 was a political necessity for Henry VIII, but it created one of history's most famous ghosts. Witnesses report seeing her headless figure walking the Tower Green where she was beheaded, carrying her own head under her arm. Her apparition has been spotted in the chapel where she was buried, and guards have reported encounters with her spirit that left them unconscious from sheer terror. What makes the Tower of London particularly unnerving is the variety of supernatural activity reported there. The Bloody Tower, where the two young princes were allegedly murdered, echoes with the sound of children playing. The Salt Tower is haunted by the ghost of Henry Walpole, a Jesuit priest who was tortured there. Moving on from our exploration of European castles and American sanitariums, we venture into the scorching deserts of India, where ancient curses and government warnings converge at one of the most feared locations on Earth. Bhangar Fort stands as a testament to how supernatural terror can transcend cultural boundaries, becoming so notorious that even official authorities acknowledge its malevolent presence. The Archaeological Survey of India has taken the unprecedented step of legally prohibiting entry to Bhangar Fort between sunset and sunrise. Think about that for a moment. A government agency, bound by scientific protocol and bureaucratic procedure, has officially recognized that something within these ruins poses a genuine threat to human safety. This isn't folklore or superstition speaking, this is institutional acknowledgement of paranormal danger. Built in the 17th century by Raja Madho Singh, Bhangar Fort was once a thriving palace complex that housed royalty and their courts. Today it lies in complete ruin, its crumbling walls and empty chambers serving as a haunting reminder of the catastrophe that befell this once magnificent stronghold. The locals refuse to establish permanent settlements anywhere near the fort, despite the prime real estate and agricultural potential of the surrounding land. The curse that destroyed Bhangar originated with Princess Ratnavati, renowned throughout the region for her extraordinary beauty. A local tantric, a practitioner of dark magic, became obsessed with the princess and attempted to bewitch a cosmetic oil she regularly used. His plan was to make her fall helplessly in love with him through supernatural manipulation. But Princess Ratnavati discovered the plot before the enchanted oil could take effect. Rather than simply discarding the bewitched cosmetic, the princess poured it over a massive boulder. The stone immediately came to life, rolling with supernatural force directly toward the tantric and crushing him to death. But as he lay dying beneath the weight of the enchanted stone, the sorcerer used his final breath to curse the entire landscape. He declared that no soul would ever find peace within these lands, that the fort and all who dwelt there would face complete destruction. The curse manifested with terrifying swiftness. Within a year, the entire population of Bhangar had either fled or perished under mysterious circumstances. The once bustling palace became a ghost town overnight, its halls echoing with unexplained sounds and its courtyards plagued by supernatural phenomena. Generations have passed since that fateful day, yet the curse shows no signs of weakening. Visitors who braved the fort during daylight hours report an overwhelming sense of being watched, even when completely alone among the ruins. Cameras malfunction without explanation, capturing strange shadows and unexplained figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. The temperature drops suddenly in certain areas, creating pockets of unnatural cold even during India's scorching summer months. The most disturbing reports come from those who've attempted to photograph or film within the fort's boundaries. Electronic equipment fails at crucial moments, batteries drain completely within minutes, and recorded footage often reveals disturbing anomalies. Faces appear in windows of empty buildings, shadows move independently of any light source, and voices can be heard whispering in languages that predate modern civilization. But it's what happens after dark that has earned Bhangar its reputation as India's most haunted location. The few who violated the government ban and remained past sunset describe experiences that defy rational explanation. Disembodied voices call out from empty chambers, footsteps echo through corridors where no living person walks, and apparitions manifest with such clarity that witnesses initially mistake them for other trespassers. Local legends speak of spirits that roam the fort's grounds each night, trapped souls who cannot find peace due to the tantric's curse. These aren't merely the ghosts of former residents. They're described as malevolent entities that actively seek to harm the living, drawing them deeper into the ruins where they become lost forever. Search parties have found abandoned clothing and personal belongings scattered throughout the fort, but the individuals who left them behind have never been recovered. The Archaeological Survey of India's prohibition isn't merely a bureaucratic formality. It represents the convergence of documented disappearances, unexplained deaths, and supernatural encounters that have occurred with such frequency that official intervention became necessary. Rangers patrol the area to enforce the ban, but even they refuse to approach the fort itself after darkness falls. From the cursed palaces of India, we journey to the sun-soaked shores of California, where the most famous ocean liner in history has found its final resting place. The RMS Queen Mary, permanently docked in Long Beach, has earned the nickname the Grey Ghost, not only for its wartime service, but for the numerous spirits that are said to inhabit its luxurious corridors and staterooms. During its operational years from 1936 to 1967, the Queen Mary served as both a luxury passenger liner and a wartime troopship. The vessel witnessed countless human dramas during its decades of service. Births, deaths, wartime tragedies, and peacetime celebrations all unfolded within its steel hull, creating an emotional residue that many believe continues to manifest today. At least 49 confirmed deaths occurred aboard the Queen Mary during its years of service. While most resulted from natural causes such as heart attacks and illnesses, several tragic incidents stand out as particularly significant. These deaths, combined with the intense emotions experienced by millions of passengers over 3 decades, have created what paranormal investigators describe as a perfect storm for supernatural activity. Stateroom B340 has earned recognition as the most haunted location aboard the entire ship. Guests who've stayed in this room report bed sheets being pulled off during the night, faucets turning on by themselves, and unexplained knocking sounds emanating from within the walls. The room was actually closed to guests for several years due to the frequency and intensity of paranormal encounters. Today, it's been reopened as part of a paranormal package experience, complete with ghost hunting equipment for brave visitors. The ship's first-class swimming pool area generates the most detailed eyewitness accounts of supernatural activity. The pool has been drained and dry for decades, yet visitors consistently report the sounds of children splashing and playing in non-existent water. Wet footprints appear around the pool's edge, despite the absence of any moisture source. The spirit most commonly encountered here is that of Jackie, a young girl who allegedly drowned in the pool during the ship's operational years. Jackie's presence extends beyond the pool area. Staff and guests have reported encounters with her throughout the ship, describing a playful child spirit who seems to enjoy interacting with the living. Unlike many haunted locations where spirits appear distressed or malevolent, Jackie's manifestations are often described as curious and friendly, though her appearances can still be startling for unprepared witnesses. The Queen Mary's engine room provides another hotspot for paranormal activity. The massive machinery that once powered this ocean giant sits silent now, but the area remains active with unexplained phenomena. Visitors report sudden temperature drops, the sensation of being watched, and the sound of machinery operating when all systems are shut down. Some witnesses describe seeing figures in work clothing moving among the engines, seemingly unaware that their service ended decades ago. What makes the Queen Mary particularly fascinating from a paranormal perspective is the sheer volume of documented encounters. These aren't isolated incidents reported by occasional visitors. The phenomena occur regularly, witnessed by staff members, security personnel, tour guides, and guests from all walks of life. The consistency of these reports, combined with the ship's rich history of human experience, creates a compelling case for ongoing supernatural activity. We now travel to the remote wilderness of Australia, where the isolation of the outback has preserved one of the Southern Hemisphere's most notorious haunted locations. Monte Cristo Homestead in Junee, New South Wales, stands as Australia's most documented centre of paranormal activity, its tragic history creating a breeding ground for supernatural encounters that continue to terrify visitors more than a century after its construction. Built in 1885 by wealthy landowner Christopher William Crawley, Monte Cristo Homestead was designed as a symbol of prosperity and refinement in the harsh Australian landscape. The Victorian mansion, with its elaborate cast-iron lacework and grand architecture, represented the pinnacle of colonial luxury. However, beneath its elegant facade lay a foundation of tragedy that would define the property's supernatural reputation for generations to come. The Crawley family's occupation of Monte Cristo from 1885 to 1948 was marked by a series of tragic deaths and disturbing incidents. A young child died after being dropped down the main staircase, their screams echoing through the halls before silence claimed them forever. The family's maid plummeted from the upstairs balcony under mysterious circumstances, her broken body discovered in the courtyard below. A stable boy burned to death in one of the outbuildings, his agonizing final moments searing themselves into the property's psychic fabric. Perhaps the most disturbing tragedy involved Harold, the mentally ill son of the property's caretaker. For 40 years, Harold was chained up in the caretaker's cottage like an animal, his condition deteriorating as he was denied proper care or human dignity. When his mother died, Harold was found curled up beside her decomposing corpse, his mind completely shattered by decades of abuse and isolation. He was subsequently committed to a mental institution, where he died shortly after admission. But the tragedies didn't end with the Crawley family's departure. After the house was abandoned in 1948, a series of caretakers attempted to maintain the property. One of these caretakers was brutally murdered in the cottage where Harold had been imprisoned, adding yet another layer of violence to the homestead's dark history. Today, Monte Cristo operates as a bed and breakfast, offering visitors the opportunity to experience its paranormal activity firsthand. The ghost of Harold remains the most active presence in the house, his tormented spirit unable to find peace after decades of suffering. Guests report encounters with a confused, frightened entity that seems to be searching for something or someone that can never be found. The young child who died on the staircase continues to make their presence known through the sound of small footsteps running through the halls and the echo of childish laughter in empty rooms. The maid who fell from the balcony has been seen standing at the upstairs windows, her figure visible from the courtyard below, before vanishing without explanation. What sets Monte Cristo apart from other haunted locations is the intensity and frequency of the paranormal encounters. This isn't a place where occasional strange sounds or fleeting shadows provide mild entertainment for ghost tour participants. Monte Cristo delivers full-scale supernatural experiences that leave visitors genuinely shaken and questioning their understanding of reality. Guests who spend the night at Monte Cristo report being awakened by the sound of chains dragging across the floor above their rooms, the echo of Harold's decades of imprisonment continuing to reverberate through the building. Others describe encounters with shadowy figures that move through the rooms with purpose, as if continuing routines from their living days. The property's isolation in the Australian countryside adds another layer of psychological intensity to these encounters. Unlike urban haunted locations where help and civilization remain nearby, Monte Cristo sits alone in the vast outback landscape. When supernatural phenomena occur here, visitors find themselves truly isolated with whatever forces inhabit this tragic homestead. The convergence of multiple traumatic deaths, decades of human suffering, and the property's remote location has created what paranormal researchers describe as a perfect environment for supernatural manifestation. The emotional residue of tragedy has saturated Monte Cristo homestead so thoroughly that the boundary between past and present seems permanently blurred. These locations we've explored represent more than mere curiosities or tourist attractions. They stand as monuments to human suffering, repositories of tragedy where the normal laws of existence appear suspended. The infamous Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, stands as one of America's most celebrated haunted destinations, forever immortalized as the inspiration for Stephen King's terrifying novel, The Shining. This grand Georgian colonial revival hotel, built in 1909 by inventor Freelan Oscar Stanley, has been welcoming guests for over a century. But it's not just the living who check in and never quite check out. Stanley himself, along with his wife Flora, are said to still roam the halls of their beloved hotel. Guests frequently report hearing piano music drifting from the empty ballroom, attributed to Flora's ghostly performances on her beloved Steinway. Stanley's own spirit has been spotted in the billiard room and bar, apparently still enjoying his favorite pastimes in the afterlife. Room 217, where Stephen King himself stayed during his fateful visit in 1974, remains the hotel's most requested and most haunted accommodation. Guests report unpacked luggage, lights turning on and off, and the ghostly presence of former housekeeper Elizabeth Wilson, who was injured in an explosion in that very room in 1911. The hotel's fourth floor, once the servant quarters, pulses with particularly intense paranormal activity. Children's laughter echoes through empty corridors, balls bounce down hallways by themselves, and guests report being tucked into bed by invisible hands. The concert hall hosts not only living performers, but spectral audiences who applaud long after the curtain falls. What makes the Stanley Hotel particularly chilling is how the supernatural activity seems to mirror the luxury and elegance of the establishment itself. These aren't malevolent spirits seeking revenge, but rather former guests and staff who found the hotel so enchanting that death itself couldn't convince them to leave. Our journey through the world's most haunted locations continues with Rainham Hall in Norfolk, England, home to the legendary Brown Lady. This Jacobean mansion, built in the 1630s, gained international notoriety in 1936 when photographers captured what remains one of the most famous ghost photographs ever taken. The image shows a translucent figure in brown robes descending the main staircase, her face a horrifying void where features should be. The Brown Lady is believed to be Lady Dorothy Walpole, who was allegedly locked away in the hall by her husband after discovering her infidelity. She died under mysterious circumstances, and her spirit has wandered the halls ever since. Witnesses describe a woman in brown brocade with a ghastly, eyeless face that strikes terror into anyone unfortunate enough to encounter her. The photograph, taken by Country Life magazine photographers, has been subjected to extensive analysis and remains unexplained by conventional means. Beyond the Brown Lady, Rainham Hall hosts numerous other spirits. Guests report footsteps in empty corridors, doors slamming shut, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched. The hall's Christmas parties are said to be attended by ghostly revelers who dance to music only they can hear. Cold spots appear without warning, and many visitors report feeling an oppressive sadness that seems to emanate from the very walls themselves. Deep in the Romanian countryside stands Bran Castle, forever linked to the legend of Dracula despite its actual historical connections being tenuous at best. Built in 1377, this fortress perched dramatically on a rocky outcrop has witnessed centuries of violence, betrayal, and death. While Vlad the Impaler may have had only passing connections to the castle, the spirits that inhabit its chambers are very real indeed. Visitors report encounters with a spectral woman in white who glides through the castle's narrow corridors, believed to be Queen Marie of Romania, who lived there in the 1920s. Her presence is often accompanied by the scent of roses, her favorite flower. The castle's torture chamber, deep in its bowels, emanates an almost palpable evil. Guests describe feeling nauseated and overwhelmed by despair when entering this space, as if the suffering of countless victims has permanently stained the atmosphere. The castle's towers are particularly active, with witnesses reporting dark figures moving across the battlements at night. Strange lights appear in windows of supposedly empty rooms, and the sound of medieval music drifts from the Great Hall long after the last tourist has departed. Electronic equipment frequently malfunctions within the castle walls, and many visitors report their cameras capturing mysterious orbs and shadows that weren't visible to the naked eye. What makes Bran Castle especially unsettling is how the Gothic architecture seems to amplify the supernatural activity. The narrow staircases, hidden passages, and shadowy alcoves create an atmosphere where the boundary between the living and the dead becomes dangerously thin. Even skeptics find themselves glancing over their shoulders and quickening their pace through the castle's more remote chambers. Our exploration takes us next to the ancient Ram Inn in Gloucestershire, England, a building so intensely haunted that even paranormal investigators struggle to spend a full night within its walls. Built on a pagan burial ground in the 12th century, this former inn has been the site of countless supernatural encounters that range from merely unsettling to absolutely terrifying. The inn's owner, John Humphreys, lived there for decades and documented thousands of paranormal incidents. He claimed to have been physically attacked by demons, dragged from his bed by invisible forces, and to have discovered skeletons of children buried beneath the staircase. The building is said to be a portal to the spirit world, with entities constantly moving between dimensions within its walls. Visitors report being pushed, scratched, and grabbed by unseen hands. The temperature drops without warning, and the oppressive atmosphere makes it difficult to breathe. Succubi and incubi are said to prey upon guests, and many report waking to find mysterious injuries on their bodies. The inn's mirrors reflect figures that aren't actually present, and photographs often reveal ghostly faces peering from windows and doorways. The building's history as a pagan site adds another layer to its supernatural activity. Ancient rituals performed on the grounds seem to have opened doorways that should have remained sealed. The very foundations of the inn are said to be cursed, and attempts to renovate or modernize the building often result in accidents and unexplained phenomena that drive workers away. What makes the ancient Ramin particularly terrifying is the sheer volume and intensity of the paranormal activity. This isn't a gentle haunting by former residents, but rather an active supernatural battleground where malevolent entities wage war against any living soul brave enough to enter their domain. Our journey through the world's most haunted places reveals a disturbing pattern. These locations, scattered across continents and cultures, share common threads of violence, tragedy, and unresolved suffering. Whether it's the Green Lady of Chateau de Brissac seeking justice for her murder, the tortured souls of Poveglia Island crying out from their mass grave, or the tuberculous spirits of Waverly Hills Sanatorium refusing to accept their deaths, these places serve as reminders that some wounds run too deep to heal, even in death. The supernatural activity documented at these locations defies conventional explanation. Cold spots, apparitions, physical attacks, and electronic disturbances suggest that consciousness can indeed survive bodily death under certain traumatic circumstances. The intensity of the phenomena seems directly proportional to the level of suffering experienced at each location, as if extreme emotional trauma creates an indelible imprint on the physical world. Perhaps most unsettling is the realization that these haunted places exist all around us, hidden in plain sight. That historic inn where you spent a romantic weekend, the old hospital converted into apartments, the ancient castle that serves as a tourist attraction, they all carry the invisible scars of their past. The spirits that inhabit these spaces aren't confined to ghost stories and horror movies. They're as real as the stones and mortar that house them, waiting patiently for the living to stumble into their domain. As our exploration of the world's most haunted places concludes, we're left with more questions than answers. What force allows consciousness to persist beyond death? Why do some spirits move on while others remain trapped in an endless cycle of torment? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead becomes so thin that it finally disappears altogether? These haunted locations stand as monuments to human suffering, but also as proof that death may not be the end we imagine it to be. In these places where the veil between worlds grows thin, we catch glimpses of a reality far stranger and more terrifying than our rational minds can accept. Now we venture into the darker corners of our world, where the line between the living and the dead becomes disturbingly thin. These next locations aren't just haunted, they're absolutely saturated with malevolent energy, drawing from centuries of suffering and bloodshed that have left permanent scars on the very fabric of reality. This imposing Dutch colonial building in Semarang served as the headquarters for the Dutch East Indies Railway Company from 1919 to 1942. When the Japanese invaded during World War II, they transformed this administrative building into something far more sinister. The basement levels became torture chambers and execution sites, where countless prisoners met their gruesome end. Today, those basement areas remain the most haunted sections of the building. Visitors report being physically pushed by invisible hands, hearing agonized screams echoing through empty corridors, and witnessing shadowy figures dragging chains across the floors. The building's name takes on a chilling new meaning when you realize that behind those 1,000 doors, unspeakable horrors occurred that left the spirits of the tortured trapped within these walls forever. Moving to the Scottish Highlands, we encounter Edinburgh Castle. Perched dramatically above Scotland's capital city, this 11th century fortress has witnessed over 900 years of warfare, executions, and political intrigue. The castle's dungeons once held prisoners of war who died in agony from starvation and disease. Staff members and tourists regularly report encounters with headless drummers marching through the stone corridors, ghostly bagpipers whose music echoes from empty towers, and the spirits of former prisoners still wandering the cells where they perished. One of the most disturbing phenomena involves a mysterious piper who disappeared centuries ago while exploring the castle's underground tunnels. Visitors still hear his ghostly music drifting up from beneath the ancient stones, suggesting his spirit remains lost in those dark passages below. But perhaps no European castle can match the sheer concentration of supernatural activity found at Dragsholm Castle in Denmark. Built in 1215, this medieval fortress is widely considered the most haunted castle in all of Europe, home to at least 100 different spirits. The castle served as a prison for nobles and clergy in the 16th and 17th centuries, where many died in captivity under horrific conditions. The most famous ghost is the White Lady, whose skeletal remains were discovered in 1930, sealed within the castle walls. She appears to visitors as a pale figure in flowing white robes, wandering the corridors searching for a way out of her eternal prison. The Earl of Bothwell, husband of Mary Queen of Scots, also haunts these halls after dying as a prisoner here. Guests staying at the castle, which now operates as a luxury hotel, report being awakened by phantom footsteps, doors slamming on their own, and the sensation of invisible hands touching them in the darkness. This 13th century fortress sits at the confluence of two rivers, creating an isolated and foreboding atmosphere. Local folklore speaks of the Zvikovsky Rarashek, a malevolent imp-like entity that torments visitors by draining camera batteries, extinguishing fires, and causing animals to behave in bizarre and frightening ways. The castle's tower carries an especially sinister reputation. Legend warns that anyone who spends the night there will die within a year. Visitors report encounters with spectral black dogs roaming the grounds and hearing the anguished wails of spirits echoing across the water at night. This grand hotel, built in 1909, sits high in the Rocky Mountains like a beacon for paranormal activity. The hotel's fourth floor is particularly active, with guests reporting phantom children running through the hallways, invisible hands tucking them into bed, and ghostly laughter echoing from empty rooms. The most haunted room, 217, was where Stephen King himself stayed and experienced the supernatural encounters that inspired his terrifying novel. Guests in this room report furniture moving on its own, lights flickering in mysterious patterns, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. What makes these locations so intensely haunted isn't just their age or their tragic histories, it's the sheer volume of human suffering that occurred within their walls. These places became focal points for negative energy, where the boundaries between our world and the spirit realm have been worn thin by centuries of anguish, fear, and death. The spirits that inhabit these locations aren't peaceful or benevolent. They're angry, confused, and often malevolent entities that feed off the fear and discomfort of the living. The psychological impact of visiting these places cannot be understated. Even the most skeptical visitors often leave with their worldview fundamentally shaken. There's something about experiencing unexplained phenomena firsthand that bypasses our rational mind and taps into our most primal fears. The cold spots that make your breath visible in summer heat, the sounds of footsteps in empty corridors, the sensation of invisible hands touching you in the darkness. These experiences challenge everything we think we know about the nature of reality itself. What's particularly disturbing about these locations is how the supernatural activity seems to intensify during certain times. Many report increased paranormal encounters during the hours between midnight and 3 a.m., often called the witching hour, when the veil between worlds is supposedly at its thinnest. Others notice heightened activity during times of emotional stress or vulnerability, as if the spirits can sense when visitors are most susceptible to their influence. The staff and caretakers of these locations often develop their own coping mechanisms for dealing with the constant supernatural presence. Some refuse to work alone, while others carry protective charms or recite prayers before entering certain areas. Many report becoming almost numb to the paranormal activity over time, treating the ghostly inhabitants like unwelcome but permanent residents who must simply be tolerated. Perhaps most unsettling is how these places seem to leave lasting impressions on visitors long after they've departed. People report experiencing nightmares, feeling constantly watched, or having unexplained occurrences in their own homes following visits to these haunted locations. It's as if the negative energy of these places can somehow attach itself to visitors, following them back into their normal lives and serving as a permanent reminder of the supernatural forces they encountered. The question that haunts researchers and visitors alike is whether these spirits are trapped by their own unfinished business, held captive by the traumatic circumstances of their deaths, or if they choose to remain in these locations for reasons we cannot comprehend. But before we move on, let me tell you about something that happened just last month. A paranormal investigator contacted me after experiencing something at the Stanley Hotel that left even seasoned professionals shaken. She'd been documenting supernatural activity for over 15 years, but what she encountered in room 217 changed everything she thought she knew about the spirit world. And that brings us to our next location, a place where Stephen King himself was inspired to write one of the most terrifying novels ever created. The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado stands majestically against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, its white Georgian colonial architecture gleaming like a beacon in the wilderness. Oh, Stanley, this grand hotel was meant to be a luxurious retreat for wealthy guests seeking the healing mountain air. But beneath its elegant facade lies a darkness that has been feeding off human fear for over a century. Room 217 is where it all began for Stephen King. In 1974, the author and his wife stayed in this very room during the hotel's off-season when they were practically the only guests in the entire building. The isolation, the empty hallways, the strange sounds echoing through the night, all of it culminated in King's nightmare that would become The Shining. But what many people don't realize is that King's fictional horrors pale in comparison to the actual experiences reported by guests and staff. The spirits here don't just make their presence known through cold spots or flickering lights. They interact with guests in ways that defy explanation. Guests report their luggage being unpacked by invisible hands, with clothes neatly folded and placed in drawers. Children's laughter echoes through the halls at 3 in the morning, followed by the sound of a ball bouncing down the stairs. Piano music drifts from the concert hall even when it's locked and empty. But it's the 4th floor that truly terrifies even the bravest visitors. This floor, once the servants' quarters, pulses with an energy so malevolent that many guests refuse to venture there after dark. The temperature drops 20 degrees without warning. Doors slam with such force that the entire building shakes. And then there are the children. Phantom children who run through the halls, their footsteps pounding against the wooden floors, their voices calling out for parents who died decades ago. Staff members have learned to work around the supernatural residents. They've grown accustomed to elevators moving on their own, stopping at floors where no one pressed the button. They've accepted that certain rooms will always be colder than others, that some doors will never stay closed, that shadows move independently of their owners. But even the most experienced employees admit there are areas of the hotel they avoid, corners where the darkness seems to breathe. The Stanley's supernatural activity isn't limited to gentle hauntings. Guests have reported being physically touched by unseen hands, their belongings thrown across rooms by invisible forces. One family checked out in the middle of the night after their young daughter began having conversations with someone who wasn't there. Someone who told her disturbing things about the hotel's past. Security cameras have captured footage of figures walking through walls, of lights turning on and off in impossible patterns, of shadows that move against the direction of any visible light source. What makes the Stanley particularly unsettling is how the paranormal activity seems to intensify based on the emotional state of the guests. Those who arrive skeptical often leave as believers, while those who come seeking supernatural encounters sometimes get far more than they bargained for. The hotel feeds off human energy, drawing strength from fear, excitement, and curiosity. It's as if the building itself has developed a consciousness, one that delights in blurring the line between reality and nightmare. But the Stanley Hotel represents something even more disturbing than individual hauntings. It's a perfect example of how traumatic energy can saturate a location, transforming it into a beacon for supernatural activity. It's a place where the barrier between our world and whatever lies beyond has been worn paper thin. The most chilling aspect of the Stanley isn't what you see or hear during your stay. It's what follows you home. Guests report that their experiences at the hotel don't end when they check out. The spirits seem to form attachments, following visitors back to their daily lives. Electronics malfunction for weeks after their visit. Strange sounds echo through their homes. They wake up with the distinct feeling that they're being watched. Some guests have reported seeing the same phantom children who roam the Stanley's halls appearing in their own bedrooms hundreds of miles away. This phenomenon of spiritual attachment highlights one of the most terrifying aspects of truly haunted locations. They don't just house the dead, they actively recruit the living. Each visitor becomes a potential vessel, a way for these malevolent forces to expand their influence beyond the confines of their earthly prison. The Stanley Hotel isn't just haunted, it's infectious, spreading its supernatural plague to anyone unfortunate enough to spend the night within its walls. As we journey deeper into our exploration of the world's most haunted places, a pattern emerges that should chill you to your very core. These locations share more than just ghost stories and unexplained phenomena. They represent tears in the fabric of reality itself, places where the natural order has been so thoroughly corrupted that the impossible becomes inevitable. From the plague-ridden island of Poveglia to the blood-soaked Tower of London, from the cursed palace of Bhangar Fort to the floating tomb of the Queen Mary, each location serves as a gateway between worlds. The spirits that inhabit these places aren't merely echoes of the past. They're active, malevolent forces that have learned to manipulate our reality. They feed off human emotion, growing stronger with each terrified scream, each moment of despair, each soul they manage to corrupt. And they're patient, eternally patient, waiting for the right moment to extend their influence beyond the confines of their haunted domains. What's most disturbing is how these locations continue to attract visitors despite their terrifying reputations. Perhaps it's human curiosity, or maybe it's something darker, a subconscious pull that these supernatural forces exert on the living. Whatever the reason, each new visitor provides fresh energy for these ancient evils, ensuring that the cycle of horror continues unbroken. The 33 locations we've explored represent just a fraction of the haunted places scattered across our world. They're windows into a reality where death is not an ending, but a transformation, where human suffering leaves permanent scars on the landscape itself, where the past refuses to stay buried. They remind us that there are forces in this universe far beyond our understanding, forces that view human life as nothing more than fuel for their eternal hunger. As you go about your daily life, remember that you're never truly alone. The boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead is far thinner than most people realize. And in certain places, under certain circumstances, that boundary disappears entirely. The legends say some places on Earth never let go of the suffering they've witnessed. Each stone, each floorboard, each shadow holds memories that refuse to fade. We're talking about locations where tragedy has stained the very fabric of reality, creating permanent scars between our world and whatever lies beyond. These aren't just old buildings with creaky floors. These are monuments to human suffering, places where the veil between life and death has been torn so violently that it can never fully heal. As we continue our journey through the world's most haunted locations, we're about to encounter places where the dead don't just linger. They thrive, they feed, they wait for the living to stumble into their domain, desperate to share their eternal torment with anyone foolish enough to cross their threshold. What makes these next locations particularly terrifying isn't just their history of violence and despair. It's the sheer volume of paranormal activity that continues to this day. Visitors report being physically attacked by invisible forces, electronics malfunction without explanation, and people leave forever changed by encounters with entities that should not exist. These are places where skeptics become believers in the span of a single night, where the impossible becomes undeniably real. The 15th location on our list takes us to the windswept moors of England, where Pendle Hill rises like a dark sentinel against the Lancashire sky. This isn't just any hill. This is the site of one of the most infamous witch trials in English history, where in 1612, 10 people were executed for practicing witchcraft. The Pendle witch trials weren't just a historical footnote, they were a bloodbath that left an indelible mark on the landscape itself. The Pendle witches, as they came to be known, were mostly women from two feuding families, The Demdikes and the Chatoxes. Their rivalry turned deadly when accusations of witchcraft began flying, leading to arrests, trials, and ultimately executions. But here's what makes Pendle Hill truly terrifying. The witches allegedly cursed the land before their deaths, ensuring that their suffering would echo through the centuries. Visitors to Pendle Hill report seeing apparitions of hooded figures moving across the moors, particularly during the full moon. Hikers describe feeling an overwhelming sense of dread as they climb the hill, as if invisible eyes are watching their every move. Electronic devices drain instantly, compasses spin wildly, and many people report hearing whispered incantations carried on the wind. The hill seems to pulse with malevolent energy, as if the earth itself remembers the injustice done upon its slopes. Local farmers refuse to graze their livestock on certain parts of the hill, claiming that animals become agitated and refuse to eat. Dogs bark at empty air, and horses rear up in terror for no apparent reason. There's something in the soil, something in the very stones of Pendle Hill that remembers the blood spilled there over 4 centuries ago. Our 16th haunted location brings us to the heart of London, to one of the city's most prestigious addresses. 50 Berkeley Square has earned the sinister nickname of the most haunted house in London, and for good reason. This Georgian townhouse has been the site of so many unexplained deaths and supernatural encounters that it's become legendary among paranormal investigators. The house's dark reputation began in the Victorian era, when it was owned by a reclusive man who locked himself away in the upper floors after being jilted by his fiancée. Neighbors reported seeing a figure pacing back and forth in the windows day and night for decades. When he finally died, the house was left empty, but the hauntings had only just begun. The most terrifying part of 50 Berkeley Square is the top floor. Multiple people have died in the uppermost room under mysterious circumstances. In the 1870s, a maid was found dead in the room, her face twisted in absolute terror. She had apparently died of fright, though what she saw remains unknown. A nobleman who stayed in the room overnight was found dead the next morning. Clutching a pistol, he had apparently turned on himself in desperation. Even experienced paranormal investigators refused to spend the night in that room. Those brave enough to enter report feeling an oppressive presence, as if something ancient and malevolent is pressing down on them. The temperature drops dramatically, and many people flee in terror, claiming they've seen a shapeless mass of evil that defies description. The house seems to feed on fear, growing stronger with each terrified visitor. 17th on our list is Château de Brissac in France, home to the infamous Green Lady. This magnificent castle in the Loire Valley appears beautiful from the outside, but within its ornate walls lurks one of France's most persistent ghosts. The Green Lady, or La Dame Verte, has been terrorizing guests for centuries, and her appearances are becoming more frequent and more aggressive. The ghost is believed to be Charlotte de Brézé, a woman who was murdered in the castle during the 15th century after her husband discovered her affair. But what makes the Green Lady particularly horrifying isn't just her tragic backstory, it's her appearance. Witnesses describe a woman in an elegant green dress, but where her face should be, there are only gaping black holes where her eyes and nose once were. The sight is so disturbing that grown men have fainted upon seeing her. The current Duke of Brissac and his family have learned to live with their ghostly resident, but guests are not so fortunate. The Green Lady appears most often in the tower room, where she allegedly met her violent end. She's been known to walk through walls, appear in mirrors, and even sit on the edge of beds where people are sleeping. Her hollow moans echo through the castle corridors in the early hours of the morning, a sound so chilling that it wakes everyone in the building. What's particularly unsettling about the Green Lady is her apparent intelligence. She seems to target specific individuals, following them throughout their stay and appearing when they least expect it. Many guests have cut their visits short, unable to endure her constant presence. The castle's guest book is filled with accounts of encounters with the Green Lady, each more terrifying than the last. Our 18th location takes us to one of America's most notorious prisons, Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. This crumbling fortress introduced the world to solitary confinement, a practice so brutal that it drove many inmates to madness and suicide. The prison closed in 1971, but the suffering that occurred within its walls has left an indelible mark that continues to terrorize visitors today. Eastern State wasn't just a prison, it was a laboratory for psychological torture. Inmates were kept in complete isolation, forced to wear hoods whenever they left their cells, and subjected to punishments so severe that many preferred death to continued imprisonment. Instead, it led to madness, despair, and countless deaths. The paranormal activity at Eastern State is relentless. Visitors report seeing shadowy figures darting between cells, hearing disembodied voices pleading for help, and feeling invisible hands grabbing at them in the darkness. Cell Block 12 is particularly active, with reports of a malevolent presence that attacks anyone who enters. Multiple visitors have been scratched, pushed, and even choked by unseen forces. The most disturbing aspect of Eastern State is the psychological effect it has on visitors. Many people report feeling overwhelming despair and hopelessness the moment they enter the prison. Some visitors have had complete mental breakdowns, requiring immediate medical attention. It's as if the building itself has absorbed the collective anguish of thousands of inmates and now radiates that suffering back at anyone who dares to enter. Photography equipment malfunctions constantly at Eastern State, with cameras capturing images of figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. Electronic voice phenomena recordings have captured what sound like inmates begging for release, their voices echoing from cells that have been empty for decades. The prison seems to exist in a state of temporal flux, where the past and present collide in terrifying ways. This seemingly picturesque island has one of the darkest histories imaginable, serving as a plague quarantine station where over 160,000 people died in agony. But the horror didn't end with the plague victims. In the 20th century, the island housed a mental hospital where a sadistic doctor performed gruesome experiments on patients. Paveglia's soil is literally composed of human ash. For centuries, the bodies of plague victims were burned in massive pyres, their remains mixing with the earth until the island became a monument to mass death. Walking on Poveglia means walking on the cremated remains of thousands of souls who died in unimaginable suffering. The mental hospital that operated on the island in the early 1900s added another layer of horror to Poveglia's dark legacy. The doctor who ran the facility was rumored to perform lobotomies and other experimental procedures on patients without anesthesia. He allegedly tortured patients for his own twisted pleasure before finally throwing himself from the hospital's bell tower, claiming he was driven mad by the ghosts of his victims. Today, Poveglia is officially off-limits to the public, but illegal tours still occur. Those brave enough to set foot on the island report an immediate sense of dread and despair. The soil itself seems to whisper with the voices of the dead, and many visitors claim to hear screaming coming from beneath the ground. Electronic equipment fails instantly, and photographs often show mysterious figures that weren't visible when the pictures were taken. Fishermen refuse to fish in the waters around Poveglia, claiming that their nets bring up human bones instead of fish. The island seems to exist in a perpetual state of supernatural activity, as if the massive amount of death and suffering has created a permanent tear in reality itself. Even viewing the island from a distance fills many people with an inexplicable sense of terror. This antebellum mansion is built on land that was once a Native American burial ground, and its history is steeped in murder, slavery, and unspeakable cruelty. The plantation is home to at least 12 ghosts, each with their own tragic story of death and injustice. The most famous ghost of the Myrtles is Chloe, a slave who was allegedly hanged after poisoning members of the plantation owner's family. She appears as a figure in a green turban, often seen caring for children who died over a century ago. But Chloe is far from the only spirit haunting the plantation. The ghosts of murdered slaves, murdered family members, and even Confederate soldiers are said to roam the grounds. The plantation's mirror is particularly infamous, believed to contain the trapped souls of Sarah Woodruff and her children, who died from poisoning. Visitors often see handprints and faces appearing in the mirror's surface, and many photographs capture images of figures that weren't visible when the pictures were taken. The mirror seems to serve as a portal between the world of the living and the dead. Guests who stay overnight at the Myrtles, which now operates as a bed and breakfast, report a constant sense of being watched. Many are awakened by the sounds of children playing in the hallways, only to find the corridors empty, Others report being tucked into bed by invisible hands or having their belongings mysteriously moved during the night. The plantation's history of violence seems to have created a supernatural feeding ground where spirits draw energy from the fear and suffering of the living. The more terrified visitors become, the more active the ghosts seem to grow. It's a vicious cycle that has made the Myrtles one of the most consistently active paranormal locations in America. These locations share a common thread that makes them particularly dangerous. They're not just haunted by individual spirits, they're infected with a kind of supernatural plague that spreads suffering like a contagion. The trauma that occurred in these places has fundamentally changed them at a molecular level, creating environments where the normal rules of reality no longer apply. They've become feeding grounds for entities that exist on human fear and despair, growing stronger with each terrified visitor who crosses their threshold. The pattern is always the same. Historical trauma creates a wound in reality. That wound festers over time, becoming infected with malevolent energy. Eventually, the location becomes a beacon for dark forces, drawing them like moths to a flame. Château de Brissac stands as one of France's most magnificent castles. Yet beneath its stunning Loire Valley facade lurks a presence so malevolent that even the current Duke and his family have learned to coexist with pure evil. This isn't just another castle ghost story. This is the domain of La Dame Verte, the Green Lady, whose very appearance can shatter a person's sanity in seconds. What makes her so terrifying isn't just that she roams the castle's corridors at will, but that her face bears the gaping wounds of her brutal murder, holes where her eyes and nose should be, resembling a walking corpse that refuses to stay dead. The Green Lady's story begins in the 15th century with a tale of betrayal, adultery, and savage revenge. Charlotte de Brézé, an unfaithful wife, was discovered in her infidelity by her husband. In a fit of murderous rage, he brutally killed both Charlotte and her lover within the castle walls. But death was not the end for Charlotte. Instead, it became the beginning of an eternal torment that would plague Château de Brissac for centuries to come. Her spirit, forever trapped by the violence of her death, transformed into something far more sinister than a mere ghost. Witnesses describe encounters with La Dame Verte that go beyond typical paranormal activity. She appears wearing her signature green dress, moving through the tower room of the chapel with an otherworldly presence that chills observers to the bone. But it's when she turns to look directly at someone that true terror begins. Her face, a grotesque mockery of humanity, features hollow cavities where human features should exist. Those who've seen her describe an overwhelming sense of malevolence, as if staring into the face of pure evil itself. The Green Lady doesn't simply appear and vanish like other spirits. Her presence is accompanied by bone-chilling moans that echo throughout the castle during the early morning hours, creating an atmosphere of dread that permeates every stone of the ancient structure. These aren't the gentle sighs of a restless soul, but the anguished cries of something twisted by centuries of hatred and revenge. The current residents have become accustomed to her nocturnal wanderings, but guests often flee in terror after encountering this malevolent entity. Moving from France to Italy, we encounter Poveglia Island, a cursed piece of land near Venice that represents one of humanity's darkest chapters. This small island, now legally prohibited to visitors, harbors such concentrated evil that even illegal tour operators struggle to find brave souls willing to set foot on its contaminated soil. Poveglia's nightmare began when it served as a quarantine station for plague victims, but what happened there transcended mere disease and death. It became a breeding ground for malevolent forces that continue to terrorize anyone foolish enough to visit. During the bubonic plague outbreaks, Poveglia Island became a dumping ground for the dying and dead. Thousands upon thousands of plague victims were brought to this isolated location, where they suffered unimaginable agony before death finally claimed them. But the island's dark history didn't end with the plague. In 1922, a mental hospital was established on Poveglia, and this is where the true horror began. A doctor stationed at the facility began conducting crude, barbaric experiments on patients, performing lobotomies with primitive tools and methods that can only be described as torture. The experiments conducted on Poveglia Island were so horrific that they drove the doctor himself to madness. According to witnesses, he claimed that the spirits of plague victims were tormenting him, driving him to increasingly desperate acts of cruelty against his patients. The malevolent energy of the island had infected his mind, transforming him into something as twisted as the land itself. Eventually, unable to bear the spiritual assault any longer, he threw himself from the hospital tower, adding his own tormented soul to the legion of spirits that haunt Poveglia. Today, visitors to Poveglia Island report experiences that defy rational explanation. The sound of footsteps echoing across the empty landscape in the dead of night, the sensation of invisible eyes watching from the shadows, and the overwhelming feeling that something ancient and evil is stalking them. Many who attempt to explore the island flee before completing their visit, driven away by encounters with apparitions that seem more demon than ghost. The soil of Poveglia is literally mixed with human ash, creating a foundation of death upon which these supernatural horrors thrive. The island's malevolent reputation has grown so severe that even seasoned paranormal investigators hesitate to spend extended time there. Those brave enough to venture onto Poveglia often discover that their electronic equipment malfunctions mysteriously, cameras refuse to work properly, and an oppressive atmosphere of dread settles over them like a suffocating blanket. The spirits of Poveglia aren't merely restless souls seeking peace, they're angry, vengeful entities that seem to feed off the fear and suffering of the living. Across the Atlantic in Kentucky, Waverly Hills Sanatorium stands as a monument to medical horror and supernatural terror. This former tuberculosis treatment facility witnessed the deaths of thousands of patients, but the true nightmare lies in how these souls departed this world. The infamous body chute, also known as the death tunnel, served as the final journey for countless victims who succumbed to both disease and the primitive medical treatments of the era. This tunnel of death has become one of the most spiritually active locations in the world, where the boundary between life and death has been permanently shattered. Waverly Hills wasn't just a hospital, it was a death factory. While estimates vary, somewhere between 8,000 and 68,000 people died within its walls, creating a concentration of death and suffering that has left permanent psychic scars on the location. The body chute itself tells the story of systematic death. This 525-foot tunnel was used to transport corpses from the sanatorium down to the bottom of the hill, where they would be taken for burial or cremation. The sheer volume of death that passed through this tunnel has created a supernatural highway, where spirits continue their eternal journey. The deaths at Waverly Hills weren't limited to natural causes from tuberculosis. 2 nurses took their own lives at the facility in the 1920s and 30s, adding their tormented spirits to the growing collection of supernatural entities. A man was murdered inside the building during its abandoned years, and there are reports of a tragic accident involving a young boy who may also have been murdered. Each death added another layer to the malevolent energy that now permeates every corner of the sanatorium. Paranormal investigators who venture into Waverly Hills report encounters that go far beyond typical ghost sightings. The spirits here are active, intelligent, and often hostile toward the living. Visitors experience physical attacks, unexplained injuries, and encounters with entities that seem to possess malevolent intelligence. The death tunnel itself remains one of the most active areas, where the spirits of those who made their final journey continue to travel between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. What makes Waverly Hills particularly terrifying is the variety of supernatural phenomena reported there. From shadow figures that stalk the corridors to voices calling out from empty rooms, the sanatorium hosts a full spectrum of paranormal activity. Some spirits seem trapped in endless loops, repeating the final moments of their lives, while others appear to be fully aware of visitors and react accordingly. The combination of massive death, suffering, and the traumatic nature of the medical treatments performed there has created a perfect storm of supernatural energy. The investigation continues as we delve deeper into the world's most haunted locations, where the living and the dead exist in a terrifying dance of supernatural terror. As we delve deeper into our exploration of the world's most haunted places, we encounter locations where the supernatural realm bleeds through with such intensity that skeptics become believers and the curious become forever changed. These next destinations on our chilling journey reveal themselves as more than mere historical sites. They stand as monuments to human suffering, where the echoes of torment refuse to fade into silence. Our journey takes us now to the rugged coastline of California, where permanently docked in Long Beach Harbor sits a vessel that once carried dreams across the Atlantic, but now harbors nightmares from another era. The RMS Queen Mary, launched in 1936, served as both luxury ocean liner and wartime troopship before finding her final berth as a floating hotel. Yet those who board this magnificent vessel today discover they're sharing quarters with passengers who never disembarked. During her years of service, the Queen Mary witnessed at least 49 confirmed deaths, though many believe the actual number climbs much higher. Natural deaths from heart attacks and strokes occurred regularly aboard any vessel of this size, but it's the violent tragedies that seem to anchor spirits to her steel corridors. The ship's wartime service proved particularly deadly, with soldiers and crew members meeting their end in accidents, attacks, and mysterious circumstances that remain classified to this day. The most notorious location aboard the Queen Mary is Stateroom B340, a first-class cabin that hotel management sealed for years due to the sheer volume of disturbing incidents reported by guests. Those brave enough to spend a night in B340 describe bedsheets being violently ripped away in the darkness, faucets turning on by themselves, and shadowy figures materializing at the foot of the bed. The room's telephone rings at all hours, but no voice answers when guests pick up the receiver. So intense are the phenomena that the room now offers paranormal investigation packages, complete with EMF detectors and Ouija boards for those seeking direct contact with the other side. The ship's drained first-class swimming pool presents perhaps the most heartbreaking haunting aboard the Queen Mary. Jackie Torrin, a young girl who allegedly drowned in these waters decades ago, continues to play in the bone-dry pool area. Guests and staff regularly hear the sounds of splashing water and children's laughter echoing from the empty pool deck. Wet footprints appear along the pool's edge, trailing across the deck in patterns that suggest a child running and playing. Security cameras have captured unexplained mists swirling above the pool, and several visitors have photographed what appears to be a small figure in vintage swimming attire standing at the pool's deep end. The engine room deep in the Queen Mary's bowels harbors its own collection of restless spirits. During the ship's conversion from ocean liner to hotel, workers frequently reported tools disappearing and reappearing in impossible locations. Heavy machinery would activate without human intervention, and the temperature in certain areas would plummet without explanation. The ghost of a young sailor, believed to have died in a machinery accident, has been spotted numerous times walking through the engine room's maze of pipes and boilers. From the haunted seas, we travel to the Australian outback, where the Monte Cristo homestead in Junee, New South Wales, stands as the continent's most notorious haunted house. Built in 1885 by wealthy landowner Christopher William Crawley, this Victorian mansion witnessed decades of tragedy that transformed it into a magnet for paranormal activity. The Crawley family resided in the homestead until 1948, during which time the property became a stage for multiple deaths, accidents, and mysterious disappearances. The tragedies began early in the home's history when a young child was dropped down the main staircase, dying from the injuries sustained in the fall. A housemaid employed by the Crawley family plummeted from the second-floor balcony under circumstances that were never fully explained. In the property's stables, a young stable boy burned to death in a fire that consumed the building's hay stores. Each death seemed to add another layer to the home's growing supernatural reputation. Perhaps the most disturbing story connected to Monte Cristo involves Harold, the mentally ill son of the property's caretaker. For 40 years, Harold was chained in the caretaker's cottage, hidden away from society by family members who couldn't cope with his condition. When authorities finally discovered him, Harold was found curled beside his mother's decomposing corpse, having survived alone for weeks after her death. He was immediately committed to a mental institution where he died shortly after arrival. Harold's spirit is considered the most active presence at Monte Cristo, with visitors reporting physical attacks, objects being thrown across rooms, and an overwhelming sense of rage and despair in areas where he was confined. The homestead's tragic history didn't end with the Crawley family's departure. A caretaker who took residence in the cottage after 1948 was brutally murdered on the property, his killer never identified. This final violent death seemed to seal Monte Cristo's reputation as a place where the boundary between life and death had been permanently compromised. Current visitors to Monte Cristo, which now operates as a bed and breakfast, report a wide range of paranormal phenomena. Guests frequently hear footsteps pacing the hallways at night, accompanied by the sound of chains dragging across wooden floors. Doors slam shut on their own, and several visitors have been physically pushed or grabbed by invisible hands. The home's mirrors reflect figures that aren't present in the room, and photographs taken throughout the house often reveal unexplained shadows and faces that weren't visible to the naked eye. This imposing Dutch colonial building served as headquarters for the Dutch East Indies Railway Company from 1919 until World War II, when Japanese forces seized control and converted it into a military prison and execution site. The building's countless windows and doorways create a labyrinthine interior where shadows seem to move independently of any light source. During the Japanese occupation, Lawang Sewu's basement levels became interrogation chambers and execution sites, where countless prisoners met their end. The basement areas, already prone to flooding and structural decay, absorbed decades of human suffering that manifests today as intense paranormal activity. Visitors to Lawang Sewu consistently report feeling watched from empty doorways and experiencing sudden temperature drops in specific areas of the building. Electronic equipment malfunctions regularly within the structure, with cameras and recording devices either failing completely or capturing images and sounds that defy explanation. The basement levels prove particularly active, with witnesses describing apparitions of prisoners still wearing the tattered remains of military uniforms. The building's most notorious ghost is believed to be a Dutch woman who died during the Japanese occupation, possibly executed as a spy or resistance member. She appears throughout the building, but seems drawn to the upper floors where administrative offices once operated. Witnesses describe her as wearing a white dress stained with what appears to be blood, her face bearing the marks of violence. She doesn't communicate with the living, but seems intent on showing them something, leading visitors through the building's maze of corridors before vanishing into walls or doorways. Security guards who patrol Lawang Sewu at night report the most intense encounters with the supernatural. Many have quit their positions after experiencing physical attacks from invisible forces, hearing voices calling their names from empty rooms, and witnessing doors opening and closing in sequence as if something were moving systematically through the building. The guards who remain speak of learning to coexist with the building's ghostly inhabitants, acknowledging their presence while avoiding certain areas during specific hours. From Indonesia, we journey to the misty highlands of Scotland, where Edinburgh Castle dominates the capital city's skyline from its perch atop an extinct volcano. This ancient fortress, with foundations dating to the Iron Age, has served as royal residence, military stronghold, and prison throughout its thousand-year history. Each role has contributed to the castle's reputation as one of Scotland's most haunted locations. The castle's dungeons, carved directly into the volcanic rock, once housed prisoners of war, political dissidents, and common criminals in conditions of unimaginable hardship. Many prisoners died in these underground chambers, their bodies thrown into mass graves or simply left to rot in their cells. Today, visitors to the dungeons report overwhelming feelings of despair and claustrophobia that seem to emanate from the stone walls themselves. Edinburgh Castle's most famous ghost is the headless drummer who appears on the castle's battlements, particularly during times of national crisis or impending attack. First sighted in 1650 before Cromwell's invasion of Scotland, the drummer has appeared regularly throughout the centuries, his phantom drumbeat echoing across the castle grounds as a harbinger of approaching danger. During World War II, several witnesses reported seeing the drummer on the nights before major air raids on Edinburgh. The castle's Great Hall harbours the spirit of a piper who disappeared while exploring the tunnel system that allegedly connects Edinburgh Castle to the Royal Mile below. According to legend, the piper entered the tunnels playing his bagpipes so that those above could track his progress. The music continued for some time before abruptly stopping halfway along the supposed route. When search parties entered the tunnels, they found no trace of the piper, but his phantom music still echoes through the castle's corridors, particularly on quiet evenings when the tourist crowds have departed. Prison cells throughout the castle complex exhibit intense paranormal activity, with visitors reporting the sensation of invisible hands grabbing at their clothing and voices whispering in languages they don't recognize. The temperature in these areas often drops dramatically without warning, and several visitors have photographed what appears to be human figures standing in empty cells. Our final destination in this segment takes us to Denmark, where Dragsholm Castle stands as Europe's most haunted fortress. Built in 1215, this imposing structure served as fortress, royal residence, and prison throughout its 800-year history. The castle's role as a prison for noble and ecclesiastical prisoners proved particularly significant in creating its supernatural reputation. Dragsholm Castle is believed to house over 100 different ghosts, each tied to specific tragic events in the building's long history. The most famous spirit is that of James Hepburn, 4th Earl of Bothwell and husband to Mary, Queen of Scots. Imprisoned at Dragsholm after his capture in 1573, Bothwell spent his final years chained in a cell barely tall enough for him to stand upright. He died insane after 10 years of captivity, and his spirit is said to roam the castle's corridors, particularly the tower where he was held. The White Lady of Dragsholm represents one of the castle's most tragic hauntings. For centuries, visitors reported seeing a young woman in a white dress wandering the castle's halls, particularly near the tower rooms. In 1930, during renovation work, construction workers discovered a skeleton walled up behind a castle wall, wearing the remnants of a white dress. The skeleton was believed to be that of a young woman from a noble family who had been imprisoned for having an affair with a commoner. After the skeleton's discovery and proper burial, sightings of the White Lady decreased significantly, though she still appears occasionally, now seeming more peaceful than the tortured spirit she once was. The Grey Lady haunts the castle's living areas and is believed to be the spirit of a former servant who continues her duties in death. Unlike many castle ghosts, the Grey Lady seems benevolent, often appearing to warn of danger or to comfort guests who are troubled or ill. Staff at the castle, which now operates as a luxury hotel, have grown accustomed to her presence and consider her a protective spirit rather than a threatening one. These haunted locations reveal a disturbing pattern that connects the most supernaturally active places on Earth. Each site witnessed prolonged human suffering, violent death, and intense emotional trauma that seems to have permanently altered the fabric of reality itself. Whether through individual tragedy or mass suffering, these places absorbed the final moments of human consciousness in ways that continue to manifest centuries later. The spirits that inhabit these locations display intelligence, purpose, and an apparent awareness of the living world that suggests consciousness persists beyond physical death. They interact with their environment, respond to human presence, and seem driven by unfinished business or emotional states that transcend the grave. The Château de Brissac in France might look like a fairy tale castle from the outside, but step inside and you'll come face to face with one of Europe's most terrifying residents. The Green Lady, or La Dame Verte as she's known locally, has been haunting these halls for over 5 centuries. Witnesses describe her as a woman in an elegant green dress. But when she turns to look at you, her face is nothing but gaping holes where her eyes and nose should be. The current Duke of Brissac and his family have grown accustomed to her presence, but guests often flee in terror after encountering her in the tower room of the chapel. What makes the Green Lady particularly unsettling is how she moves through the castle with purpose, as if she's still carrying out some unfinished business from her tragic past. Legend tells us she was Charlotte de Braise, murdered by her husband in a fit of jealous rage after discovering her infidelity. Her moans echo through the corridors in the early morning hours, and her appearances are so frequent that the family has simply learned to coexist with their supernatural resident. Moving from the elegant halls of France to the desolate waters near Venice, we find Poveglia Island, a place so haunted that the Italian government has banned public access. This small patch of land served as a plague quarantine station where over 100,000 people died in agony. The soil itself is 50% human ash, and locals claim you can still hear the screams of the dying carried on the wind. But the horror didn't end with the plague. In 1922, a mental hospital was built on the island, and rumors persist of a sadistic doctor who performed crude lobotomies on patients using nothing more than a hammer and chisel. According to local accounts, this doctor was eventually driven mad by the spirits of those who had died before him, ultimately throwing himself from the hospital tower while claiming the ghosts were forcing him to join them. Today, fishermen refuse to cast their nets in the surrounding waters, claiming they pull up human bones instead of fish. The few brave souls who have illegally visited the island report an overwhelming sense of dread, electronic equipment failing without explanation, and the distinct feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. In Kentucky, the imposing Tudor Gothic structure of Waverly Hills Sanatorium stands as a monument to suffering on an almost unimaginable scale. Built to treat tuberculosis patients, this facility witnessed somewhere between 8,000 and 68,000 deaths, depending on which historical account you believe. The uncertainty itself speaks to the chaos and desperation that once filled these halls. The most chilling feature of Waverly Hills is the body chute, a 525-foot tunnel that staff used to secretly remove corpses from the building. They called it the Death Tunnel because it was the last journey thousands of patients would ever take. Today, paranormal investigators consider this area the most active in the entire facility, with reports of shadowy figures, disembodied voices, and an overwhelming sense of despair that seems to seep from the very walls. What makes Waverly Hills particularly disturbing is that not all deaths were from tuberculosis. 2 nurses took their own lives in the 1920s and 30s, unable to cope with the constant presence of death. A man was murdered in the abandoned building years later, and there are reports of a young boy who may have met a violent end within these walls. Each tragic death has added another layer to the supernatural activity that continues to this day. The Tower of London represents nearly 1,000 years of royal cruelty, political intrigue, and violent death. Since William the Conqueror built this fortress in 1067, it has witnessed executions, murders, and acts of betrayal that would make even the most hardened historian shudder. The stone walls have absorbed centuries of anguish, creating what many consider to be Britain's most haunted location. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII and the first he executed, remains the most frequently cited ghost. Witnesses describe seeing her headless form wandering the grounds where she was beheaded, sometimes carrying her own head under her arm. In 1864, a military guard was so terrified by her apparition that he charged at her with his bayonet, only to pass straight through her ghostly form before fainting from shock. But Anne Boleyn is just one of many spirits trapped within these walls. The Bloody Tower, where 2 young princes were allegedly murdered by their uncle, echoes with the sounds of children playing and crying. Visitors report sudden temperature drops, the smell of decay, and an oppressive atmosphere that seems to press in from all sides. Across the Atlantic, Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia pioneered a form of punishment so cruel it drove many inmates insane. The Pennsylvania system, as it was called, subjected prisoners to complete solitary confinement. Inmates lived, ate, and exercised alone, and when they left their cells, black hoods were placed over their heads to ensure complete isolation from human contact. The psychological torture was so severe that many prisoners lost their minds entirely. Some were chained with their tongues attached to their wrists to prevent them from speaking. The desperation and madness that filled these cells for over a century has left an indelible mark on the building's atmosphere. Today, visitors to the museum report disembodied voices calling out from empty cells, shadowy figures moving through the corridors, and an overwhelming sense of claustrophobia and despair. The spirits of Eastern State seem to be reliving their torment, trapped in an endless cycle of isolation and suffering. In India, Bhangar Fort carries such a sinister reputation that the Archaeological Survey of India has legally prohibited entry after sunset and before sunrise. Local villages have sprung up miles away from the fort, their residents too terrified to live in its shadow. The ruins themselves seem to radiate an aura of malevolence that affects everyone who enters. The most widely accepted legend tells of Princess Ratnavati, whose beauty caught the attention of a powerful tantric, or sorcerer. When he tried to bewitch a cosmetic she was to use, she discovered his plot and poured the enchanted substance on a boulder. The rock immediately crushed the sorcerer to death, but with his dying breath he cursed the entire region, declaring that no soul would ever find peace there. The curse appears to have taken hold, Locals report that anyone who enters the fort at night never returns by morning. Strange lights dance among the ruins, inhuman voices echo from empty chambers, and an oppressive darkness seems to swallow any source of illumination. Even during daylight hours, visitors describe feeling watched by malevolent presences and an overwhelming urge to flee. The RMS Queen Mary, now permanently docked in Long Beach, California, has earned the nickname the Ghost Ship for good reason. During her years of service, at least 49 confirmed deaths occurred aboard the vessel, but it's the manner of these deaths and the lingering presence of the victims that makes this ship so haunted. Stateroom B340 is considered the most active location on the ship. Guests report bedsheets being torn from their bodies, faucets turning on by themselves, and shadowy figures standing at the foot of their beds. The room was closed to the public for years due to the disturbing experiences, but has since reopened with a paranormal package complete with ghost hunting equipment for the truly brave. The first-class swimming pool, now bone dry, is haunted by the spirit of Jackie Torrin, a young girl who allegedly drowned in its waters. Visitors report wet footprints appearing around the empty pool, the sounds of children laughing and splashing in non-existent water, and the overwhelming presence of a playful yet melancholic child spirit. Australia's Monte Cristo homestead in New South Wales has witnessed more than its fair share of tragedy since its construction in 1885. The Crawley family, who owned the property until 1948, experienced a series of horrific deaths that seem to have left permanent scars on the building itself. A young child was dropped down the main staircase, a maid fell from the balcony under mysterious circumstances, and a stable boy burned to death on the property. Perhaps most disturbing was Harold, the mentally ill son of a caretaker who was chained in the cottage for 40 years until he was found curled up next to his dead mother's body. The tragedy didn't end with the Crawley family's departure. Subsequent caretakers also met violent ends, including one who was murdered in the very cottage where Harold had been imprisoned. Today, the homestead operates as a bed and breakfast, offering guests the chance to experience the paranormal activity firsthand. In Indonesia, Lawang Sewu, the House of 1,000 Doors, served as the headquarters for the Dutch East India Railway Company before falling into Japanese hands during World War II. The building's basement levels are considered among the most haunted locations in Southeast Asia, with visitors reporting encounters with the spirits of those who died during the Japanese occupation. The building's name comes from its numerous doors and windows, but locals believe these openings serve as portals for the restless dead. The basement, in particular, seems to be a focal point for paranormal activity, with reports of ghostly figures, unexplained sounds, and an atmosphere so oppressive that many visitors flee in terror. Edinburgh Castle, perched high above Scotland's capital city, has been the site of countless battles, executions, and supernatural encounters over its 900-year history. The medieval fortress is home to numerous spirits, including ghostly soldiers who continue to patrol the battlements and the famous Phantom Piper who disappeared in the castle's tunnels centuries ago. Visitors report hearing the skirl of bagpipes echoing from empty corridors, the sound of marching feet on ancient stones, and glimpses of figures in period dress who vanish when approached directly. The castle's reputation for paranormal activity draws thousands of ghost hunters and curious visitors each year, making it one of Scotland's most investigated haunted locations. Denmark's Dragsholm Castle, built in 1215, holds the distinction of being Europe's most haunted castle, with reports of over 100 different spirits dwelling within its walls. The castle served as a prison for noble and ecclesiastical prisoners in the 16th and 17th centuries, and many of those who entered its dungeons never left. The most famous ghost is the Earl of Bothwell, third husband of Mary, Queen of Scots, who died as a prisoner in the castle's dungeons. Visitors report seeing his tormented spirit wandering the halls, still seeking freedom after centuries of captivity. The White Lady, whose skeleton was discovered walled up in the castle during renovations in 1930, is another frequent apparition, her mournful presence a reminder of the castle's dark secrets. Built in the 13th century, this medieval fortress is said to be haunted by a black dog, a weeping woman, and the mischievous Zvikovsky Rarashek, an imp-like creature from local folklore. The castle's tower carries a particularly sinister legend. Anyone who spends the night there will die within a year. This curse has reportedly claimed several victims over the centuries, and the tower remains off-limits to overnight guests. Looking around the world, we've journeyed through castles and asylums, forts and ships. But our exploration of the most haunted places on Earth isn't complete without visiting some locations where the very air seems to pulse with otherworldly energy. These next destinations will challenge everything you thought you knew about the supernatural, taking us deeper into the realm where the living and the dead coexist in the most unsettling ways imaginable. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado stands as one of America's most notorious haunted destinations, forever immortalized as the inspiration for Stephen King's masterpiece, The Shining. This grand mountain resort, perched majestically in the Colorado Rockies, has been welcoming guests since 1909, but many visitors leave with far more than they bargained for. O. Stanley still roams the halls of his beloved establishment, often spotted playing piano in the music room or greeting guests in the lobby with the same hospitality he showed in life. But it's not just Mr. Stanley who refuses to check out permanently. Room 217, where Stephen King himself stayed and experienced the supernatural encounters that would inspire his famous novel, remains the hotel's most requested and most feared accommodation. Guests report phantom hands tucking them into bed, ghostly children running through the corridors, and the haunting sound of a grand piano playing in the empty ballroom below. The fourth floor, once reserved for staff quarters, echoes with the laughter and voices of children who never grew up, their playful spirits forever trapped within these elegant walls. What makes the Stanley Hotel particularly chilling is how the supernatural activity seems to intensify during the winter months, when the hotel becomes isolated by snow, much like the fictional Overlook Hotel in King's terrifying tale. Our journey now takes us to one of Germany's most ominous structures, where centuries of bloodshed have left an indelible mark on both stone and spirit. Burg Eltz, though beautiful in its medieval splendor, harbors dark secrets within its ancient walls. This castle has witnessed over 800 years of family feuds, political intrigue, and violent deaths, creating a perfect storm for paranormal activity. The ghost of Agnes von Eltz, who died under mysterious circumstances in the 14th century, still wanders the castle's chambers, her mournful wails echoing through the stone corridors on moonless nights. But it's the castle's torture chamber that holds the most malevolent energy. Visitors describe an overwhelming sense of dread upon entering this space, where countless souls met their end in the most horrific ways imaginable. The walls themselves seem to weep with the anguish of those who perished here, and many guests report feeling invisible hands grabbing at them, trying to drag them deeper into the darkness. The castle's current inhabitants have learned to avoid certain areas after sunset, knowing that some rooms become gateways to something far more sinister than mere ghosts. Crossing continents to Japan, we encounter Aokigahara Forest, known more ominously as the Suicide Forest. This dense woodland at the base of Mount Fuji has become synonymous with death and despair, where the living come to end their suffering and the dead refuse to find peace. The forest floor is carpeted with the belongings of those who entered but never left, creating a haunting museum of final moments frozen in time. What makes Aokigahara particularly terrifying is how the forest itself seems to possess a malevolent consciousness. Compasses spin wildly, cell phones lose signal, and GPS devices fail completely within its depths, as if the forest actively prevents escape. The trees grow so densely that sunlight barely penetrates the canopy, creating an eternal twilight that disorients even experienced hikers. But it's the sounds that truly unnerve visitors. The forest is unnaturally quiet, devoid of bird songs or rustling leaves, broken only by the whispered voices of the dead calling out to the living. These are not the gentle spirits we've encountered elsewhere, but tormented souls consumed by the same despair that brought them to this cursed place, forever trying to drag others into their eternal suffering. Local legends speak of yurei, angry spirits who died in extreme emotional turmoil, and their presence permeates every inch of this haunted woodland. Search and rescue teams report that their equipment malfunctions more frequently in Aokigahara than anywhere else, and many refuse to enter certain sections of the forest after repeated encounters with apparitions that seem intent on preventing them from saving lives. Our exploration continues to Château de Chambord, in France's Loire Valley, where the Renaissance meets the supernatural in the most spectacular way. This architectural marvel, built by King Francis I in the 16th century, was designed to showcase the pinnacle of French artistry and engineering. But beneath its breathtaking beauty lies a darkness that has persisted for centuries. The chateau's famous double-spiral staircase, allegedly designed by Leonardo da Vinci himself, serves as more than just an architectural wonder. It has become a supernatural highway where the spirits of long-dead courtiers continue their eternal dance. Visitors report seeing elaborately dressed figures ascending and descending the staircases, their footsteps echoing through empty halls. The ghost of King Francis himself has been spotted numerous times, still conducting court business in rooms that have been empty for hundreds of years. But the most disturbing encounters occur in the chateau's numerous bedchambers, where the spirits of those who died violent deaths during the French Revolution continue to relive their final moments. Blood stains appear and disappear on pristine walls, and the anguished cries of the executed echo through rooms that should be silent. The chateau's extensive grounds are equally haunted, with phantom hunting parties still pursuing ghostly stags through forests that remember when they were royal hunting grounds. Night security guards refuse to patrol certain areas alone, reporting encounters with spectral figures who vanish when approached but leave behind the unmistakable scent of 16th-century perfumes and the chill of centuries-old fear. Venturing into Eastern Europe, we discover Bran Castle in Romania, forever linked to the legend of Dracula and the historical figure of Vlad the Impaler. While the connection between this medieval fortress and the infamous vampire may be largely fictional, the supernatural activity within its walls is terrifyingly real. The castle's strategic position atop a rocky outcrop has made it a witness to countless battles, sieges, and acts of unspeakable cruelty throughout its 600-year history. The ghost of Vlad the Impaler himself has been reported stalking the castle's battlements, his presence accompanied by the phantom screams of his victims. The castle's torture chambers, where thousands met their end in the most brutal ways imaginable, pulse with malevolent energy that affects visitors on a physical level. Many report sudden nausea, difficulty breathing, and an overwhelming urge to flee when entering these spaces. The castle's numerous secret passages and hidden rooms seem to shift and change, as if the building itself is alive and determined to trap unwary visitors within its stone embrace. Queen Marie of Romania, who once called Bran Castle home, is said to still wander its halls, her presence both benevolent and melancholy. Unlike the violent spirits that dominate the castle's lower levels, Queen Marie's ghost seems to serve as a protector, warning visitors away from the more dangerous areas where darker entities lurk. Her favorite room, preserved exactly as she left it, occasionally fills with the scent of her favored roses, even in the depths of winter when no flowers bloom. Our journey through the world's most haunted places has revealed a disturbing pattern. These locations, scarred by human suffering and supernatural malevolence, serve as gateways between our world and something far more sinister. They remind us that some places are forever changed by the events they witness, becoming magnets for entities that feed on human fear and despair. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, these destinations offer undeniable proof that certain locations hold memories, emotions, and energies that transcend our understanding of life and death. Each of these haunted places tells a story of human tragedy transformed into supernatural terror, where the boundary between past and present, living and dead, becomes dangerously thin. As we journey deeper into the world's most haunted locations, we find ourselves at a crossroads between the living and the dead, where the boundaries of reality blur and the impossible becomes terrifyingly real. These aren't just places where people died, these are locations where death itself seems to have taken permanent residence, feeding off fear and growing stronger with each passing year. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado stands as one of America's most notorious paranormal hotspots, a grand establishment that inspired Stephen King's masterpiece, The Shining. Built in 1909 by Freelan Oscar Stanley, this elegant hotel, perched high in the Rocky Mountains, has been accumulating ghostly residents for over a century. The most famous spirit is Flora Stanley, the hotel founder's wife, who continues to play piano in the concert hall long after her death. Guests report hearing beautiful melodies drifting through the corridors at night, only to find the music room empty and the piano bench still warm to the touch. But Flora isn't alone in her eternal residence. Room 217, where Stephen King himself stayed during his fateful visit, remains the epicenter of supernatural activity. Guests report being tucked into bed by invisible hands, having their luggage unpacked by unseen servants, and waking to find the ghostly figure of a former housekeeper still going about her duties. The fourth floor is particularly active, with children's laughter echoing through empty hallways and the sound of a ball bouncing endlessly down the corridor. Staff members have learned to work around these phenomena, treating the hotel's ghostly residents as permanent, if eccentric, guests. What makes the Stanley Hotel particularly unsettling is how the spirits seem to interact with modern technology. Electronic devices malfunction without explanation, elevators operate on their own, traveling to floors where no one has pressed the call button. Guests frequently capture inexplicable images on their phones, shadowy figures in mirrors, faces appearing in windows, and orbs of light that seem to move with purpose and intelligence. Moving across the Atlantic to Scotland, we encounter Stirling Castle, an ancient fortress that has witnessed over 1,000 years of violence, betrayal, and death. This medieval stronghold has seen countless battles, executions, and political machinations, leaving behind a legacy of restless spirits that refuse to be forgotten. The castle's great hall is haunted by the Pink Lady, believed to be the ghost of a woman who was either murdered or died of a broken heart within these walls. She appears as a shimmering figure in an elaborate pink gown, searching eternally for something or someone she lost centuries ago. The castle's dungeons tell an even darker story. Deep beneath the grand halls and royal chambers lie cramped cells where prisoners were left to rot and die. The stones themselves seem to have absorbed the anguish and desperation of those who perished here. Visitors report feeling overwhelming sadness and claustrophobia in these lower levels, even when they're unaware of the location's grim history. Some have fled the dungeons in tears, claiming to hear whispers in ancient Gaelic and feeling invisible hands grabbing at their clothes. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports of a ghostly piper who appears on the castle battlements during times of great tragedy. This spectral musician, dressed in traditional Highland garb, plays mournful tunes that seem to predict disaster. Local legend claims that his appearance foretells death or misfortune for Scotland itself. During World War I and World War II, multiple witnesses reported seeing the Phantom Piper on the castle walls just before news of major military losses reached the homeland. Deep in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil lies a place so terrifying that even the indigenous tribes refuse to speak its name aloud. The Fazenda do Inferno, or Hell's Ranch, was once a rubber plantation where thousands of workers died under horrific conditions in the early 1900s. The plantation owner, a man named Coronel Diabolico, earned his nickname through acts of cruelty so extreme that they defied human comprehension. Workers were beaten to death for minor infractions, fed to wild animals for entertainment, and buried alive as punishment for attempting escape. When the rubber boom ended, the plantation was abandoned, but the land itself seemed cursed. The jungle began to reclaim the buildings, but in unnatural ways. Trees grew through structures in perfect geometric patterns, vines formed shapes that resembled human faces twisted in agony, and the very air became thick with malevolent energy. Local guides report that compasses spin wildly in the area, GPS devices malfunction, and animals flee the region entirely. Modern paranormal investigators who have ventured into this nightmare have documented phenomena that challenge the very foundations of reality. Cameras capture images of workers still toiling in fields that no longer exist, their ghostly forms repeating the same backbreaking labor that killed them over a century ago. The plantation house itself seems to exist in multiple time periods simultaneously. Visitors see different versions of the same rooms, some showing the opulent quarters of the coronel, others revealing the squalid conditions where workers lived and died. The most terrifying aspect of Hell's Ranch is the presence of the coronel himself. This malevolent spirit hasn't simply lingered after death. He's grown more powerful and more cruel. Witnesses describe a towering figure in a white suit and Panama hat, his face a shifting mask of rage and sadistic pleasure. He appears to still oversee his plantation, commanding an army of ghostly workers and punishing any living person who dares to trespass on his domain. Several investigators have reported being physically attacked by invisible forces, waking with welts and bruises that form patterns resembling whip marks. In the mountains of Romania stands Corvin Castle, also known as Hunyadi Castle, a Gothic fortress that predates even the infamous Dracula legends. This imposing structure, with its soaring towers and maze-like interior, has been accumulating dark energy for over 6 centuries. Built on the site of an ancient pagan temple, the castle seems to serve as a conduit between our world and something far more sinister. The castle's most notorious spirit is that of Vlad the Impaler himself, who was imprisoned here for several years. His presence is felt most strongly in the dungeon where he was held, a cramped cell that seems to radiate evil. Visitors report feeling watched by unseen eyes and experiencing vivid, violent visions of medieval torture and execution. The walls themselves seem to whisper in ancient Romanian, recounting tales of impalement, flaying, and other acts of brutality that made Vlad infamous throughout Europe. But Vlad is not the only darkness that dwells within these walls. The castle's bell tower is home to something far older and more malevolent. Local legends speak of a demon that was summoned by the castle's original builders, bound to the structure through human sacrifice and dark rituals. This entity manifests as a massive shadow with burning red eyes, standing over 9 feet tall and radiating an aura of pure malice. It appears primarily to those who climb the tower alone, trapping them in a cycle of terror that can last for hours, while only minutes pass in the real world. The demon's influence extends throughout the castle, causing visitors to become lost in corridors they've walked multiple times, to see rooms that don't exist on any floor plan, and to encounter other visitors who, upon later investigation, were never actually there at all. Some guests have reported entire conversations with people who turn out to be long-dead historical figures, only realizing the truth when these phantom individuals vanish mid-sentence, leaving behind only the scent of decay and the echo of centuries-old laughter. Moving to the remote islands of Japan, we find Hashima Island, also known as Gunkanjima or Battleship Island. This abandoned coal mining facility was once home to over 5,000 people crammed into a space smaller than 16 acres, making it one of the most densely populated places on Earth. When the mine closed in 1974, the island was completely abandoned, left to decay in the harsh ocean environment. But something far more sinister than simple urban decay has taken hold of this concrete fortress rising from the sea. The island's apartment buildings, now crumbling and overgrown, are filled with the spirits of those who died in the dangerous coal mines. Mining accidents were frequent and often fatal, with workers crushed by cave-ins, poisoned by gas leaks, or simply worked to death in the brutal conditions below ground. These restless souls seem trapped not just on the island, but in an endless cycle of labor and suffering. Visitors to Hashima Island, despite strict government restrictions, report seeing lights moving through the abandoned buildings at night as if the residents had never left. The sound of machinery echoes from the sealed mine entrances, accompanied by the voices of workers calling to each other in the darkness. Most disturbing are the reports of ghostly children playing in the ruins of the island's school, their laughter carrying across the water to boats passing nearby. The island's isolation has allowed whatever supernatural forces dwell there to grow unchecked. Without the presence of living humans to ground them to reality, these spirits have become increasingly aggressive and unpredictable. The few researchers and urban explorers who have managed to reach the island describe an overwhelming sense of being watched from the empty windows of the towering apartment blocks. Some have reported being chased by invisible pursuers through the crumbling corridors, hearing footsteps and angry voices pursuing them as they flee toward their boats. What makes these locations truly terrifying isn't just their individual hauntings, but the way they seem to be connected by threads of dark energy that span the globe. Paranormal researchers have noted similarities in the phenomena reported at these sites. The same types of apparitions, the same patterns of electromagnetic disturbance, the same feeling of ancient malevolence that seems to transcend cultural and geographical boundaries. These places serve as windows into a darker reality, one where death is not an ending, but a transformation into something far more terrible. They remind us that some wounds never heal, some anger never fades, and some evil never dies. The spirits that inhabit these locations have moved beyond simple haunting. They've become something else entirely, entities that feed on fear and suffering, growing stronger with each terrified visitor who flees their presence. As we near the end of our journey through the world's most haunted places, we're forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. These locations are not anomalies or curiosities to be studied from a safe distance. They are active, malevolent forces that continue to claim new victims, to spread their influence, and to blur the line between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Each site we've explored represents a crack in the fabric of reality itself, a place where the impossible becomes inevitable and where the very act of seeking answers might just provide more questions than we're prepared to handle. The darkness that dwells in these places doesn't simply exist. It waits, it watches, and it remembers. So there you have it. 33 places where the living and the dead coexist, where terror transcends time and space, and where the very fabric of reality has been torn and twisted by centuries of suffering. These locations stand as monuments to humanity's darkest chapters, each one a portal where malevolent forces continue to feed off the pain and fear of those who dare to enter. From the cursed forests of Aokigahara to the blood-soaked walls of the Tower of London, from the plague-ridden shores of Poveglia to the demon-haunted corridors of Bangar Fort, these places remind us that some wounds never heal, some spirits never rest, and some doors should never be opened. The question isn't whether these places are truly haunted, but whether you're brave enough to face what lurks in the shadows of our world's most terrifying locations. Because once you've glimpsed the darkness that dwells within these walls, felt the cold breath of the supernatural on your neck, and heard the whispers of the damned echoing through empty corridors, you'll understand that death is not the end, but merely the beginning of something far more sinister.